Welcome back to the program. Of course, this is the second part of your favorite Pan-African show, Bottomline Africa. And before we start our studio discussion tonight, let me take you to a throwback, a soundbite tonight, which takes us back to 1960, when the first Ghanaian president, Kwame Nkrumah, addressed the United Nations Organization 3 years after the then Gold Coast, now known as Ghana, gained independence from Britain. Let's listen in.
They are intense and powerful. They are, as I've taken some pains to explain, the forces of imperialism acting through their instruments, neocolonialism and colonialism, ably assisted by the agents of the Cold War. They operate in worldwide combinations at all levels: political, economic, military, cultural, educational, social, and trade. And not all, and through intelligence, cultural, and information services. They operate from European and African centers, using agents who, I'm ashamed to say, are often unpatriotic sons of Africa, buying personal satisfactions with the betrayal of their country's safety and integrity. They seduce leaders. They seduce leaders of the African political, trade union, and people's organization, thus creating rifts and quarrels within the national front.
So that was the late Kwame Nkrumah they are speaking, forming up or making up our throwback soundbite tonight. And Togo, that is a country which has over 7 million people. There are demos that has been happening in that country for the better part of this year. And they are demonstrating against the current president, Faure Nasibe, the son and successor of Togo's 5th president, Nasibe Eyadema. The family has collectively ruled that country for 48 years. And there's also another example in Congo where Kabila's family has ruled for 18 years. The examples, are endless. We have Mauritania and Zimbabwe now, where Robert Mugabe this week did something very interesting. He fired his deputy, and reports are he might end up replacing him with his wife, Grace. And tonight, we did ask you in a Twitter poll, do you think political dynasties in Africa are a curse or a cure? Do you think political dynasties in Africa are a curse or a cure? Remember to use our hashtag #BottomlineAfrica. Our Twitter handle is @KTN News. You can as well tweet me @Yusuf Ibrahim or @Yusuf Ibra. Now, let me reintroduce our guest tonight once again. We have Mark Bichachi, a resident political analyst. Moses Dhiambo, who's also a political analyst, is going to join me all the way from our city center studio. We also have Kefa Ojijo, a lawyer and an analyst. Let me start with Kefa. Kefa, good evening. Good to see you. And let me just begin with a tweet here from one of our viewers at Kevin Omolo, who says, political dynasties are a disgrace in Africa. They have perpetuated corruption and looting in the public sector at the expense of development. Do you agree with him?
Good evening to you, Yusuf. This is a very interesting topic. Per se, number one, it may be a curse. Number two, it may be a blessing in disguise. If you read one of my favorite articles by Professor Ali Mazrui, he outlines both the pros and the cons for dynasty, not only in Africa, but even in Asia, in America, and in Europe. He explains the trend on how this thing has been happening. For instance, if you look at even the developed states, if you look at America, for instance, we've seen the transition that happened between Herbert Bush and the George W. Bush. We've also even seen the transition that happened from F. Kennedy to his brother, though the brother did not become the president, but we saw how he rose to become the senator, one of the most powerful senators in the United States. I mean, it is a trend that is not only being cultivated, or it's not only attracting Africa as a
So Kefa, is there any connection between, these political dynasties, these families who've been there in politics, and corruption, underdevelopment? Put Africa into context here.
Definitely the relationship is a must. And you remember, one of the most fundamental principles of governance says that power corrupts, and absolute power may corrupt absolutely. You see the transition that those people who have been surrounded to power already have a niche. They have a higher percentage of ascending to that power, being that they're in a position to still control those machineries in their favor. And the moment they step in, they tend to continue the legacy of their family, of their you know, their predecessors, and then they tend to continue that legacy. This legacy sometimes goes beyond even the principles, because they now start feeling that this thing belongs to us, it is ours. And then that power, when it's now absorbed, when it's now you know, absorbed in completion, it tends now to start corrupt absolutely. It tends now to start feeling that it is our own thing and we can do what we want.
Moses, before I come to you, Mark, let me hear Moses' view on these. Do you think there's any kind of connection between these political dynasties and, you know, what one of our viewers here, Kevin Omolo, has mentioned as, you know, underdevelopment and corruption in the continent?
Yusuf, that's
absolutely. I would agree with that statement in the sense that, you know, most of these dynasties have been established as a result of, you know, enormously amassed wealth. And we know in Africa, when you have wealth and you have money, chances of controlling the political landscape are very high. And for you to gain that kind of wealth, there's some undertones of, you know, dealings that are not genuine, that are not, like, you know, properly investigated. So yes, corruption is highly associated with a lot of these political dynasties. One thing I would like to add is that when you look at the African continent, I was trying to think about it, and almost half of them have had what I would call blood and politics relationship, where there's a lot of people who have had lineages from previous rulers or leaders rising easily into power. And this has not augured well for the African continent, in the sense that if you look at those countries specifically, you will notice that their growth and their development have been stunted in one way, as opposed to countries where democracy has matured and, you know, right leaders have emerged through the democratic process.
Well said, Odhiambo there. Now, Mark, let me just get another tweet from our viewers here. And at my Elfo says, not all African countries are dynasties. The issue is, you know, countries that were colonized have political problems. Correct me if I'm wrong, it seems this viewer is trying to say that we should not blame these political dynasties, but, you know, blame the leaders themselves.
No, mathematically speaking, Yusuf, and thank you for the question, only 7 out of 50-odd something countries in Africa have had some form of inheritance between father and son, and sometimes even between brothers. But it's easy to always look at any example and try to look at what has gone wrong. But if you look at Botswana as an example, you will see that it is an economy that is thriving in Africa. It is a state that is reputed worldwide, and yet the current president is a son of a former president. Now, we need to understand that within the confines of democracy, you cannot say that because so-and-so is a son of so-and-so, they cannot participate in the democratic space. Therefore, the argument might be slightly misplaced when we try to blame the mismanagement of an economy on an inheritance versus understanding that countries should be run the way you enter into a matatu. When you get into a matatu or a public transportation vehicle, is you don't check who's the driver. Your concern is it being driven well, and that's what we need to separate. We need to separate the head of state and where he comes from and how he behaves from governance, okay? So his governance is him, and his background should be left to be separate. Why this is important is because when we begin to classify things like that, then we've got to understand that in the world stage, we've had monarchies, and we have 2 monarchies in Africa. But we've also had presidents who've inherited from their forefathers and actually became very good presidents. So it's not the history, it is how the bus of the country is being driven. And that's how we need to measure this thing.
Yes. Now, Kefa, from Mark's view there, it seems he's saying, you know, all these political dynasties should not be, you know, painted with the same brush. Do you agree with him that there are some cases where these political dynasties have delivered, and he has given a good example in Botswana?
Yes, Yusuf. Not all dynasties have been a problem to Africa, not even only to Africa, even outside Africa, in Europe, in America, and in Asia. We have seen, for instance, even in our own country here, we have seen the rule of the late Mzee Jomo Kenyatta, first president. We have seen also performance by his son. To a better part, some may say he might have performed, others may say he did not perform. But the reality is that you can see a difference from his father and what his son has offered to this country. He may not have performed as per the expectations of the nation, but going by the culture of the Africa is that when these people inherit, or when this family take from their fathers or their relatives, there is that tendency that this thing belongs to us. And so they lose the focus. They lose, this is a competitive position. This is a democratic right of every other citizen that people will have to compete this. They feel that this is a position that is now guaranteed to them, and then they forget that it's not about a nation. Now it's about a household. It's about a property they can use. Look,
but Kefa, the leaders you're talking about here are those who've been elected by the people. And allow me to engage Moses once again. And Moses, you know, there are people who are saying, why should, you know, voters complain when they are the ones who voted these leaders in the first place?
Yusuf, there are a couple of things we need to look at. One is how these dynasties came into being and how they were established. In most cases, you will find that dynasties that have not been broken, you know, they have been continuous, say like in Togo or in Equatorial Guinea, where one family has ruled for ages, half a century for that matter, you are likely to see people being disenfranchised. And the problem is, I mean, I agree with my colleagues when they say political dynasties in themselves are not problems, but we have to look at the facts. I mean, there are some, you know, basic, you know, advantages of political dynasty. One of them, I would say, is political stability in a country. But on the other flip side, you can look at the entrenchment of, you know, bad leadership in a country for so many years. So I don't agree that there's nothing wrong with political dynasties. I mean,
you have a problem with the terms.
For example, in Kenya, we've seen a break. Yeah, we've seen breaks in Kenya. We've seen breaks in Botswana, for example. The current president is the son of the first president when the country got independence. That's like a gap of 30 years. So in between, democratic processes have taken place. So I have no problem with that. My problem is a continuation of one political family or class
for so long,
ruling from, you know, day one to for so long. And it doesn't have to be at the presidential level. It could be at the senatorial or, you know,
we'll come to that shortly. We'll come to that shortly, Moses. Let me now engage Mark. And Mark, if you look at the world, you know, for example, USA, there's the Bush family, the Clinton family, the Kennedys. Pakistan, there's a situation where the Bhutto family, the husband actually took over power from his wife. That is very interesting there. So clearly, this is not just an African phenomenon, because most people think that these are cases that only happen in Africa.
Absolutely not. You know, one of the things that we need to understand in human culture is when you have a child, they're most likely to inherit your traits. So if you are a politician and your child has the proclivities of being a politician, then you expect that that talent will be nurtured and grown. And a good example, of course, is the Kennedy brothers. The fact that the one brother became president and the other one became a very senior senator for a very long time in the United States, you can definitely say that there was a positive contribution towards that particular country. But you have a country like India, where we had Gandhi, who is considered the founding father of India, and one of his descendants is actually have been spotted to have mismanaged that country. And that tells you that the problem is not necessarily dynasties. And this is something that I'm struggling to explain to a lot of people. Number one, we need to understand that as an African people, we need to be set free from two kinds of thought. There's the thought that we had before the colonialists came, in the sense of the enclaves of our tribal thought. And then there's the thought we had after the colonialists left us, which is the trappings of being trapped in what they thought was our identity. And once you are lost without identity, then you begin to grope in the dark and look for other problems that really don't exist. Now, the reality of the matter, Africa does not have a dynasty problem, neither does it have a leadership problem. It has a selfishness problem.
Mark, and this begs the question, how would you describe Togo's situation when one family rules for not just 1, 2, or 3 years, but 48 years?
And that's what I'm talking about, the selfishness of it all. I have friends in Togo, and they'll tell you, the problem has not been that one president took from another. The problem has been that this particular dynasty has taken opportunity to subjugate the people for their own enrichment. And this is not a dynastic problem, because you've got Jacob Zuma, who built a cowshed at the cost of millions of dollars for his cows. And he's not the son of any former president.
But he's also grooming his former wife as the ANC leader. I think that should be interesting as well.
Exactly, you see. So it is the selfishness principle in our leadership that we need to address.
Now let me engage Kefa. And Kefa, this common notion that politics in Africa is synonymous with wealth. And, you know, if you look at these political dynasties, these are people who are well endowed, you know, they have money and everything. Do you think they might subject the rest of the candidates to some sort of unfair competition because of their power, money-wise?
Yusuf, you know, the greatest tragedy that happened to Africa is that those with their ideas and men of integrity and women never ascend to those positions. And those who ascend to those positions are those who are close to power and wealth. If this trend, as you've seen it, continues, and which has been on the run, then it simply means that there is not even future for Africa. For instance, if you look, I tend to disagree with Mark Bichache that sometimes the inheritance comes from, you know, is a trait that is inherited by the, you know, the children, so that it develops in them. Yeah, that might be true. But let's look at scenarios, serious scenarios, where these have been imposed either from external influence or because the family feel that one of you must just inherit this position. This thing has come to us and it's not leaving us anytime soon. You look at the transition, for example, from Laurent Kabila to Joseph Kabila. You look at transition from Eyadema to his son Abbas Bonfo. I mean, both military. You see, it's being forced so that this thing must remain with us. And it then unfolds that other citizens are not given opportunity to rise to this power because they do not...
So, Kefa, you don't have any problem with political dynasties provided these individuals are elected democratically?
You see, it also questions that what amounts to democratic when you are dealing with people who are close to power. Remember, it's a situation like you're dealing with an incumbent. You know, when you are dealing with an incumbent or somebody close to power, then it also raises the question, how is the level ground, you know, how is the ground level for all of them? These are people who always have a high advantage to others. And the opportunity for them to arise to such positions is always, you know, above their competitors. So it is not always democratic. That is what is made to be seen, you know, to look like democratic.
Yes.
But ideally, when you look at even this electoral process, how they happen, they're never democratic per se. And so other people will always be disadvantaged. And that is why you see in most cases that the only way these people get out of the office is through military, through revolution, or through persistent and constant revolution from the citizens themselves, that they are tired.
Mark, I'm sure you'll want to react to that.
It's a good thing that you finally agreed with me that you can inherit traits from your father. But let's understand this. We are talking specifically about dynasties. We are not talking about military dictatorships. And that's a totally different ballgame. Do I agree with how the Congo has been run? Of course not. I would be insane to do that. But we need to understand that the topic at hand is dynastic leadership. And the truth of the matter is this, that we need to separate our own feelings and our own emotions from the reality on the ground. Number one, we are talking about 7 out of 50 countries. And out of those 7, only 2 or 3 have the military background he's talking about. And we have even more that are positive examples. And this is the problem that I have, that whenever we look at ourselves as Africans, we must always extol and exhort what is negative. There's so much positivity in Africa. Look at Morocco, which is under a king. Look at that. It is instituted dynasties. And look at how Morocco is doing. So let's not throw the baby out with the water. Is there a perfect system? Of course not. Look at America. Hillary Clinton had an advantage because when she walked into that campaign trail, she was a former senator, she was the first lady of the United States of America, she won the popular vote, but she still lost to Donald Trump. What does that tell you? That dynasties are not inherently a problem. That's what I'm trying to say. Some have been problematic, yes, but you
not
cannot
all of them.
then say they are all problematic.
Moses?
I think Yusuf, I need to correct Mark a little bit here. Dynasties in Africa are not limited to 7, as he said. If you look across the southern part of the country, I mean the continent, you would find that right from West Africa across the central to southern Africa, we've seen kings and queens and presidents who have been there forever with their sons coming in later. So it's a big problem that has been there for a while. But I also honestly tend to agree with him in the sense that they are not necessarily a problem where democracy has been allowed to thrive. Now, the problem is these people have what they almost feel like some sense of entitlement, or they are owed by, the citizens of those particular countries, because either they say they fought for independence or their forefathers, So they have one undue advantage over the other candidates who may want